Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the School of Public Health and Health Professions, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I manage the Alumni Lifelong Learning Program here at UB. I am also joined by my wonderful colleague Joy Rona, who will assist in monitoring any questions. We are both so grateful you are able to join us today and hope you and your family are staying well. It is my honor to welcome today's featured presenters. UB alumna Dr. Sarah Heavey, Director of MPH Programs and Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior in the School of Public Health and Health Professions, and Dr. Jessica Kruger, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior and Interim Coordinator for Teaching Innovation and Excellence in the School of Public Health and Health Professions. Dr. Sarah Heavey has worked in public health for many years as a researcher and educator, as well as a health promotion and community lead poisoning prevention. In addition, between her MPH and PhD, Dr. Heavey completed a fellowship at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Office on Smoking and Health in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Jessica Kruger is a health educator whose research focuses on consumption and addictive behaviors, health behavior decision-making, and pedagogy in public health. Most recently, Dr. Kruger has been named a 2021 SUNY Online Ambassador for her enthusiastic, effective virtual teaching and advocacy of online education in the SUNY community. In today's webinar, Sarah and Jessica will lead a discussion on how to deliver a world-class education to today's students. We will leave some time during today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please go ahead and submit them through the GoToWebinar taskbar. There's a question section right on your screen, and you can chat those to us at any time. Both Sarah and Jessica will be monitoring the chat box and will answer your questions throughout the webinar. In addition, we will be recording today's session and we'll send you all a copy within the next 24 hours. So with that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our featured presenters, Sarah and Jessica.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. We're so excited to be here with you all today virtually. And I look forward to talking about our rising to the challenge and thinking about online education in these new and different times. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our online program, get into some details about what we're doing, and then we'll also talk about our current strategies as well as our future plans, those things that Jess and I are cooking up and are excited to roll out in the next couple of semesters. So just so we're all on the same page, I like for us to kind of reflect on this idea of education. And the object of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives. So it works well for this kind of seminar, but it's also something that we really do think about in terms of crafting our programs, and in particular our MPH program. So just so we're all on the same page, our MPH program, our online MPH program is just one of a number of MPHs that we offer in our school. Students can also pick epidemiology, community health, health behavior, and health services, among some other options. And traditionally, these have been seated programs. However, in around 2019, we started thinking about how we could bring this to more opportunities and more venues and more students. And so what we ended up doing was designing our online MPH. We enrolled our first class in fall of 2019, but we spent a lot of time prior to that thinking about how you structure online coursework and how you think about an online graduate program to best prepare students for the challenges that they'll meet. It ended up being fortuitous in a lot of ways with the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all currently living through. But this was actually something we did prior to COVID. So it wasn't a pivot that we made because of the restrictions and the public health parameters we needed to follow, but it was really something we crafted from the ground up. And I also like to just mention that our school is actually one of the schools of public health accredited by the Council on Education in Public Health. And so we're the only school in Western New York area who has that accreditation. There are some accredited programs that we as a school are fully accredited. So we've seen tremendous program growth in our MPH program. So all across the different kinds of MPH you can get here at UB, we've seen significant growth over the last several application cycles. Currently, we're actually over 150% increase from the 2020 to the 2021 application cycle. And I think in part this is due to COVID. A lot of the students are writing about in their personal statements how this has brought a new set, kind of parameters or given them fresh eyes and how important public health is for us to be thinking about. And I think that has helped us in some ways bring more students to the MPH. And I'm very proud of this, so I like to brag about it anytime I can, but for the last 4 years, we've actually had a 100% job placement rate for all of our MPH students. So we're training at a high level and our students are getting great jobs in the field, and I'm particularly proud of that. So what does our online MPH look like? Well, there's 3 components. We've got the foundational coursework, and this is actually something that is shared across all of our MPH programs because we really want our students to have those foundational core concepts in public health when they go out into the field and do their work. So these are courses like epidemiology and health behavior, a biostatistics class, and this allows our students to work in a wide variety of areas with the core set of skills they need to work effectively. The second component is our individualized coursework, and this is based on students' interests. So if they're doing the epidemiology concentration, they'll take epidemiology courses. If they're doing the community health and health behavior concentration, they'll do CHHB courses. In our online program, we really work with our students to make sure they're matching the coursework they take with what they need to succeed in their careers. And I found a lot of our online students are actually currently working in the field of public health and look at their MPH as a way to elevate their career and take it to the next step. So we really do try to make sure our students are getting what they need to effectively take their career to the next level. And then the third component is application and practice. So public health, we work so in an interdisciplinary way, and we want to train our students that way as well. And so they take courses on professionalism and teamwork, as well as contemporary issues in public health. And all of our students engage in at least one internship, which we call a field training. And this can be done globally, to be honest. We've had students work locally in Buffalo, we've had them placed at CDC in Atlanta, and we've had students go to other countries and other continents to do their field work. So it's something that, though we have some restrictions now because of COVID, it's something they really can do on a global scale. Something that's new to our online MPH recently are these 2 focus areas. So we have a focus area in health equity and we have a focus area in addiction. And these areas help our students craft their individualized program to get the most out of them. So the idea is because health equity is such an important and defining issue, something that all public health should be really working on and thinking about, we wanted to give our students the skills they needed to do better in that area. So they can focus in health equity, where they take 3 of the 4 courses I've listed here: health disparities, program planning, we have a course on sexual risk behaviors, and then a class on indigenous health. So they pick 3 of those 4, and that helps them define that individualized focus area, that individualized area of interest. We also have a focus area on addiction, and that's because many of us, myself included, do a lot of work around addiction and have a lot of expertise in addiction. And we thought this was just a really good fit for our faculty and the mentorship we can provide our students. So we have a couple of different classes there that our students take as a part of that focus area. And when our students earn their health equity focus area, they actually also earn what's called a micro-credential. And so micro-credentials are usually a couple of courses or a couple of different experiences that bundle together and show proficiency in a particular area. They come with little clickable icons that students can put on their LinkedIn profile or on their resume that link to the actual evidence of that micro-credential. So in the case of the Eliminating Health Inequities micro-credential, it links to a slide deck showing how a student's assessed a public health problem in inequity and how they propose to address it or to shift it. We also have one in facilitating learning in public health, and that we use to support our students as they work as TAs in our coursework, and can also have a lot of very practical skills that allow them to work in community health education, for example. And then our third micro-credential is on interprofessional collaborative practice. And you can see across the bottom, we have 3 different digital badges that students earn throughout their MPH that roll into this full micro-credential. So we have a number of current strategies that we're engaging, and I'm going to turn this over to Jess to talk about some of the things that we're doing.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah, for laying that foundation of where we are and where we're going. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So it's important when thinking about an online program or an online course to think about the structure. And when we want to rise to this challenge that we're facing with COVID-19, it's important that we took some time to think about how we structure our courses using evidence-based practices and delivering our courses in a way which are accessible to students and are engaging. Now, this is a challenge in an online environment. You know, I'm thinking about teaching and how, you know, Sarah and I can only see each other. We can't see all of you as you're reacting. And this is a challenge in an online course. Now, the larger challenge is you don't see that confused face. You don't see that I'm unsure how to navigate. And so what we have done in our courses is actually provide a course structure within our learning management system. We use something called Blackboard or UB Learns. And in this course structure, all of our courses they look the same when you go into it. Now, that doesn't mean the content's the same. It means that the navigation when you're looking at it is similar. This helps cut down on some of the challenges that students may face in navigating course content. They always know where assignments are going to be found. They always know that they're going to have weekly modules in these online courses. And we utilize this course structure from the Oscar rubric. So some of you may be familiar with Quality Matters, which is a way to review courses for the quality content and structure. In SUNY, we use something called Oscar. And the Oscar rubric provides a foundation for us to evaluate our online course structure and making sure that we are rising to the challenge of some of those best practices. And so we work with all of our faculty to help them design, develop, and implement courses that meet these best practices. And that's through a process of working with myself and an instructional designer to ensure that it's not all on the instructor. As we know, you don't need a license to teach college, but you do need a license to teach high school and other grades, which is interesting. And so this allows us to be able to help and support our faculty and our students as they're navigating the content of these courses. Next slide. So we want to also employ some of the newest and latest ways to teach our students. And one of those is being open. And when I talk about open, I talk about 2 different sort of teaching strategies. The first is utilizing something called open educational resources. These resources are freely available or at low cost. And so we want to make sure our courses are accessible to students. You probably remember buying that $500 textbook or that $200 textbook from one of your courses, and you know that's a hardship, especially during a pandemic. And so nearly most of our courses actually use open educational resources so that there is an additional cost for a textbook, or if there is, we try to find low cost options for those instructors to utilize. Now, on top of that, of resources, we encourage our instructors and our faculty to begin employing some open pedagogy practices. What is this, you ask? Well, it's actually collaborating with your students. And so instead of being the sage on the stage, actually asking students what they're expecting from a course. So Sarah and I, both before we start our courses, we send out some emails, a survey to students and ask them, what sort of policies do you think are fair? Should we have late work? You know, when we're meeting, what are the expectations for your fellow students to arrive? What about some of the content in the course? And allowing students to have a voice as we are building the course and as we go throughout the course. So for example, in one of my courses this semester, students decided that, you know, late work, you would get 10% reduction each day. After the 4th day, it's not being accepted. And that everyone should arrive within 3 minutes of our Zoom meeting. Those are all really great policies, and I didn't have to think of those. Students brought buy-in. They also provided some ideas about different topics and different ways to be interactive with each other. And so using the students' knowledge, having them be a co-creator of some course content, puts some ownership on the student and allows them to have their voice be heard and support our students' growth. Next slide. Now, one of my favorite areas that we work on in our program is experiential learning. And with COVID, a lot of the out of the classroom work was put on hold. Sadly, we couldn't take our students out into the world as we typically did, and so we had to be creative in how we engage students working with each other and with various organizations. And so this allowed us an opportunity to leverage some technology. One of those is an innovation sprint. And so recently, and actually 2 weeks from now, we're running another innovation sprint, which is on a current topic of vaccine distribution and the challenges of vaccine distribution with the COVID-19 vaccine. Our Masters of Public Health students will be working with pharmacy students to actually solve some of these problems, create some pitches. And these pitch decks are not just for our eyes. In fact, we bring in community reactors to evaluate our students' work and give them some feedback. This innovation sprint has a broader context. And in fact, we'll be sharing our student pitches with the faculty who are working on a larger project around COVID-19 vaccination. So this allows students to not only interact with other professions, but they can also work on those critical problem-solving skills and get feedback, not just from faculty, but from people in the field. And so these sort of experiences are what we think really sets us apart from other programs and allows our students to get that deeper learning and that synthesis. We also bring in views from the field. I think one thing that we try to pride ourselves of doing is getting various voices into the classroom. Even in an online world, this becomes a little bit easier. No one has to travel. We can Zoom in someone from Columbia University or someone from the other side of the world to give our students some context and even present some problems in which they may be solving. And so with these sort of views from the field, we try to incorporate them into the courses and have different voices be elevated as students are going through the course content. And truthfully, they love it, right? They're tired of hearing from us sometimes. So having that variety gives them a sort of way and almost positions themselves to think broader about some of these public health problems. And lastly, we really try to employ some case studies and some applied projects. I want students to be able to walk away with something where they're proud of, that they've actually solved a public health problem or are working to solve a public health problem. And Sarah and I have been working on an innovative strategy to do this in our students' capstone project. Sarah, you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So one of the things that all CEEF accredited MPH programs require is a culminating project, a capstone style experience where students show their mastery of a various area to their own interest and how they've really developed that over the course of the program. So what Jess and I are currently doing is working with a small pilot group of students to think about what they've learned over their MPH and translate that into something that they can use as a portfolio when they're meeting with potential employers and working to secure their next job in public health. So it incorporates on an interest area. We've got a student, for example, who's very interested in maternal mortality and the health inequities we see with maternal mortality, particularly among African American women. And so she's worked on a literature review of this topic, she's done a gap analysis of this topic, and she's proposing some solutions on how to address that. And we're organizing this actually on a Google site, so she's able to put the link for this on her resume, on her LinkedIn profile, and really demonstrate those skills. And as we're moving through this class, it's also been important for us to provide some additional professional development for these students. So thinking about things like, what are your values? What's important to you? We just kind of wrapped up an activity where we asked the students to very explicitly identify their values. We've also had them develop cover letters and update their resumes, and so very applied tools for job searching, but then also demonstrating the skills, the knowledge, and the expertise they've developed over their MPH program to really solidify what they've learned and position themselves well for that next step.
So the take-home message from this is we don't want to just have assignments where instructors read them, but something that can live on and demonstrate what our students have accomplished and share that with the world. Go ahead and go to the next slide. It's so important to allow students to have some choice in their education. And research has shown that when you allow students some flexibility and choice, they tend to put more effort and can demonstrate a variety of skills that they may not be able to demonstrate in other courses. So we all know people who are great at writing or great at creating presentations. And so we're working with a variety of working professionals within our program. And by providing them choice of a variety of modalities to participation and assessment, we can actually hone in on some of their strengths and encourage them to work on some of those areas where they can begin to build some of those skills. So how does this work practically? Well, allowing choice in a classroom is allowing students to either show up for a discussion board, posting on a discussion board in an online class, or showing up for an optional meeting to actually talk it out. And so by giving that choice, you may have students who are in a totally different time zone and can't make a live meeting, but can have a robust conversation online. You might also have a student who really wants to talk about it. They value that oral communication and feel that they can express themselves more. And so by adding in some of these flexible components, we're really helping our students find their strengths and work on any of their weaknesses that they may have. Furthermore, it's not just about participation, but about assessments. How can we provide an assessment where students can do it in a variety of different ways? Well, that means we have to find some flexibility and choice and be really critical about how we're meeting those learning objectives. So can a student write a paper about a topic? Of course. Can they make a video talking about that same information? Absolutely. Could they also create a PowerPoint with voiceover to walk us through some of those steps? Yes. What about a Google site? Totally. And so these are the things that we work on to allow that flexibility and choice. And we often hear from students that they'll often try something that they haven't thought about doing before. So many of our returning students may never have thought about creating a Google site. Well, here's their opportunity to learn in a safe environment, and they tend to take that. Next slide. Okay, so now you know kind of what we're doing, but we have big plans for the future. And although we're doing innovative things, we want to reach for the stars and continue to provide our students with a variety of ways to learn and grow as public health professionals. So here's where we're going. Next slide. Well, we need to get students out into the world. And with the challenge of COVID, you know, we couldn't do this for a while, but it's slowly happening now that more of our students are becoming vaccinated and we're able to work with some of our community partners. we're finding more opportunities to get our students out into the community. Now, remember, this is an online program. How are we going to do this? We have online and seated students. Well, this is where the challenge, but also the opportunity comes in. There's a variety of ways to engage students, whether on location or virtually, as many of you are tuning in from a variety of locations around the US. So when we talk about getting out into the world, we have to leverage some of the tools that we currently have and think about how to do this in a thoughtful and accessible manner. Next slide. So when we're thinking about some of these concepts of getting out into the world, we can do it in a few different ways. And the first is place-based education, so learning in the community. I was rushing back from a community center to join this webinar today because we had students in the field. They were packing bags for a food pantry that was happening this afternoon. They're working with other professions and they are serving a community. Now, we want to go beyond some of these service projects, but actually teach students in the community. We've partnered with a local community center that has provided us with some space that can be utilized as a classroom. So imagine having a lesson about assessing something within a community, walking downstairs, going out the front door, and actually doing that activity and interacting with those community members. This is the key of place-based education, and it's important that we build those relationships with some of those organizations and encourage our students to take up these opportunities. It might be scary being in a little bit of a different setting, or maybe going to a part of the Buffalo that they've never been. But in fact, getting them out of their comfort zone can help expand their educational opportunities and give them some new ways to look at some of these public health problems. Now, besides taking them someplace, with our students who may not be on site, I think it's important that we think about utilizing innovative technologies. And one of those is virtual reality. Now, many of you may think of virtual reality and see the dollar signs come up, and that's completely true. It does cost money to utilize some of these technologies, but we want to leverage some low-cost programs that have already been created and create immersive case studies that go along with these. Imagine thinking about the Ebola outbreak, putting your phone in a little cardboard lookout and being able to see Sierra Leone or other locations that have been dealing with this, looking at the environmental issues that are going on in a certain location, and begin to problem solve, getting the written and visual case study together. This can be done for about $5 to $10, getting those Google glasses that you put your phone into. That's a low-cost option to get our students out into the world virtually. We also want to increase some tech knowledge. And so as we're thinking about new ways to engage students, we have to be careful because some technologies are not always accessible, maybe costly. But the more we increase our knowledge of the knowledge that our students have around tech, the more employable they'll be. As we know, information is shared digitally, and being able to share, create, and innovate is going to be key for the next generation of public health professionals. And so by providing them an opportunity to utilize or leverage this in a classroom, we're giving them that much more of a leg up. And lastly, I'm really excited about incorporating our distance students into live classrooms. We're already working on our fall plan of bringing students back on campus. And this is great. We're excited to have students back in the classroom. But what about those distance students who want to be in a group talking about a problem, not just virtually? We're working towards a solution to allow our distance students to be able to tune in to our live classes and be part of the discussion. So this is not a hybrid model. This is something a little bit different. We'll actually be able to pull up our students on iPads, take them to their group and allow them to interact with some of the students who are in person. Imagine that, being on the other side of the world and still being able to participate in a group of your peers live during a class and to work through some of those problems. We can do it with Zoom, but can we do it multimodal? I think it's an opportunity, an exciting way to get students involved. Next slide. So speaking of that, Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about some of the application and how we're working towards solving some of these real world problems with our partners on the ground.
Thanks, Jess. So a lot of my work is on opioid use, opioid overdose, and naloxone distribution. And I am working on a project with some colleagues in the Rochester area, including a naloxone distribution program. So they actually go out on Saturdays. They have 2 routes, and it's a relatively new program, but they distribute naloxone. They also do some different support services, including they have meals, and they have kind of a food pantry and some different things that they've, to be honest, it's been a couple of very passionate, very engaged community members who started this program. And they really are looking to take it to the next step, but they're not formally trained in anything regarding program planning or evaluation. Well, I happen to teach the program planning and evaluation class. So what I'm looking to do in fall is to bring in that community organization and have them work with my students in the classroom throughout the semester to do a community needs assessment, to identify program plans that could be developed, and then to put an evaluation program in place. And for any community organization, they're going to need those things in order to take their program to the next level, not just because they need some additional structure or they need some additional support, but if they, and I know that they do, if they want to get some funding from a community organization, for example, they're also going to be able to need that documentation to say, here's what we've been doing, here's how we've been doing it, and here's how this funding could take us to the next level. And so it's my hope that the students in this class will be able to provide that expertise to this very real organization who is working to reduce opioid overdose deaths and to help them become a more formal program and to continue developing and offering the community services that they've been doing so far. So I see it as a partnership between this community member, his program, and my students, and both gain from it. The students get very practical experience. The program is able to develop some new plans and some evaluation, and it's really a win-win. And so that's something that we carry throughout our program, especially when we're placing students with field trainings and other opportunities. And so the more we can have our students applying these issues and working on real-world problems, the better.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah, for that. And, you know, that's just one example of what we're working on. And we continue to add in more application-based projects and work with those community members, maybe not even locally, but even further out, you know, working with some national organizations. Next week, my students will be working on some list of organizations for the remote area medical group that we work with on a national level. And so these are the things that students really love getting involved in, and they can see the value because it translates to them making those connections and even possibly, hopefully, getting a job with some of these organizations in the future or similar ones.
And that does happen quite often for our students, particularly those field training students, is they are working with an organization and kind of become indispensable, and that then translates into a position for them. So that's always exciting too when they're able to be linked to their next job.
Okay, I think we can go to our last slide here. So thank you so much. We wanted to give you an overview of what we're doing, where we're going, and then open it up for questions about anything that we talked about, along with any questions that you may have about some of the challenges with online teaching. So we're excited to have this discussion with you. Feel free to put your questions in the question tab or in the chat.
So Jess, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, can you speak a little bit more about the innovation sprint and how it works?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So An innovation sprint comes from the traditional hackathon, where you think about a bunch of programmers in a room trying to solve some code problems. Well, we changed this to begin to think about real world problems, solving them with students and their current knowledge. And so what we do is bring students together from a variety of disciplines, and before they come together, they have some prep work. So with this upcoming innovation sprint, students need to learn a little bit about what are the challenges. And we actually have a video from a recent graduate from our MPH program, some pharmacists talking about some of the challenges that they've seen. Next, they read a little bit of information, and then comes the live session. So we bring all our students. This innovation sprint will have over 200 students involved. It's one of the largest that we've done so far. And they meet with their team and begin to think about what challenge they're going to solve. How are they going to solve this problem? And they work together to come up with a solution. And that solution is then pitched in a pitch deck. This is a 3-minute presentation. And what we do is we upload that 3-minute presentation and have our community reactors react to it. They provide feedback, directions, support. And so students are getting information not only from faculty and support from our faculty who work on this, but individuals within the community. And so they really take away, a lot of pride in that, and they love when they get to hear like, oh yeah, that could really work. Let's have more conversations about that. And so, we will be publishing a paper shortly on our first innovation sprint. Our students felt that it was a great way to work on collaboration and communication, but also an innovative way to tackle some of the world's problems that we're working through. And this is a collaboration between our departments, our local business incubator or entrepreneurship center at the university, and those community partners. The libraries are also involved with this, which is great.
Great. So actually, speaking of the libraries, we also got a question on what are good resources for finding affordable textbook options. And I actually think of UB Libraries first with that, but Jess, what thoughts do you have?
There are so many resources out there now, which is fantastic. And when we think about free or low-cost textbooks, there is SUNY OER Services, which provides some free textbooks. I just put that in the chat. There are also some outside resources where you can find some other low-cost or no-cost textbooks. Some of those are through Merlot, the search engine Merlot has some of those. But if you start thinking about, some of the topic areas that you may be looking into, there may or may not be some of those. And so, in fact, public health, there is not a lot of OER textbooks out there, but in my course, we wrote one. We wrote our own textbook. And so we took a collaboration between our students, myself, and we now can share our textbook with others. Now, OER is not just textbooks, it's also materials. And so things that you're getting from government websites that are freely available are considered OER. There are also, if you look at some of the copyrights, there are peer-reviewed articles that are open access, and those are also considered to be OER.
That's the peer-reviewed articles have been a great thing for me in my teaching, and making those more accessible resources. And I sort of rethink how I use readings and assignments and try to present information that you might normally find in a textbook in class, and then use those readings to help apply those ideas or those techniques, or illustrate how they're applied. And so kind of flipping it around, I've also found effective to accomplishing that.
Yeah, it's a great way to have students collect information for the next group of students. And that can be a fun way to reuse and have a legacy in your class.
So another question, we've got a couple of questions around how to help people be successful in virtual environments. So perhaps showing enhancing information classes that are traditionally been in person, but now we need them to be virtual, or to working with students who might be at greater risk and keeping them engaged. What are some ideas there, Jess, that you might have for enhancing engagement or better providing information in a virtual environment?
Structure, structure, structure. It's so important that your material is accessible and engaging, and that starts with how you lay that content out. So you can't just record a 3-hour lecture of a talking head and put it online. That's not how it works. But instead, chunking content into smaller areas that are engaging to students. Interleaving content, so not just putting up 5 videos, but maybe have information that they read, then a video, then maybe a podcast, and then maybe an exploration activity. It's important that you vary the content in your online courses and make it fun and engaging. And, instilling that fun part comes from the instructors, on the instructor's plate, because if I'm excited about the material, students will be excited about the material. And conveying that in an online environment is exhausting sometimes, but so important. I walk away from teaching an online synchronous class and I need a nap, because you have to put in so much extra effort to be engaged, to be enthusiastic than you do in a classroom. In a classroom, you walk in, you make eye contact, you maybe talk about what you're doing, you can engage students a little bit easier. But online, that's a challenge. And I always come back to, well, what would I want, right? We know that TED Talks work because they have a story weaved in and they're short. So how can you make your content have that story, make it stick, and begin to help students achieve some of those learning outcomes? And so, structure, delivery of that content is also important. And thinking about new ways of delivery. Maybe it's not an all asynchronous class or all synchronous, but maybe there's some components that are asynchronous and then you meet for a short amount of time. I'm utilizing a bichronius model in my course right now where students do most of the content asynchronously, but we meet for 35 minutes once a week. And during that, it's all active learning. So they are working on problems together as teams. And that seems to be a great way to help engage some students.
I think too, it's a very different approach. So when I taught classes in person, it's a lot easier to just kind of show up and ad lib as you go along. So if you find, you're lecturing on a topic and students have a lot of questions about it, in that moment, you can say, well, let's do this activity or this other thing to help you understand this concept better. And teaching online, I've really had to step back and say, okay, what's the point of what I'm teaching them today? What are some things that I think they might struggle with? And what can I put in place in advance to make sure that they're understanding or engaged with the material? And so I find I spend a lot more time thinking about what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to teach it in an online environment compared to those in-person experiences. And I think it really is in part because you can't improvise in an online. What's there is there, and it needs to be followed more closely for those students to really stay engaged. So we've got an interesting question on real-world barriers that create delays and students not being able to meet deadlines or complete projects in time to complete a requirement or to graduate. So I have some thoughts, but I happen to know that one of them was actually Jess's solution because I was dealing with this last semester. And her suggestion was to have a form where students could ask for or request an extension, and then they could set their own deadline to meet that extension. I called it the extension fairy form, and I think it was by far one of the most popular things I've ever done in a class. Students loved that they could log on, just kind of enter their information into the form, and in a very no judgment way. I mean, we've all been dealing with greater pressures and greater stressors than any of us have really experienced before, and juggling lots of responsibilities, including for many students, different kinds of caregiving responsibilities. And so they've really enjoyed that ability to kind of make more flexible deadlines for themselves. Jess, what other thoughts or comments might you have on addressing those real world barriers?
Life happens, and that's a challenge. We have to work within the context in which we're given. And I think, now more than ever, being flexible and providing solutions for students and being empathetic, right? We're all tired, and that can reduce our empathy, but really asking students, are you okay? And I tend to reach out to students who I don't see come to our online sessions or who haven't turned in work. And almost 100% of the time, I end up getting a very lengthy email of this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and I was worried about reaching out. What can we do? And with that, I work with them to find the solution. Is it that you push off some stuff? Is it that we work on time management skills? What is it that will help you to be successful?
And with some of those barriers too, we've run into a variety of sometimes technology type barriers for students. So, if you have to complete an assignment by a certain deadline, or testing has been a really challenging thing for many instructors when looking at these remote times. And so I found that having a window in which students can do things, or a window in which they can submit a test or an assignment, can often be a lot more helpful than between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, you have to do this test. And that does help them if they need to email me for tech support or get in touch with the UB Learns tech team. It gives them the opportunity to do that. So that's another thing that we've had to really lean on our UBIT support and help us get through some of these challenges. So we've got a question on when do we solicit input from students on the course syllabus? Does this happen before the semester begins, or have there ever been any issues with students not feeling that the expectations were set up in advance of the course beginning? And so let's answer that first, and then I'll take the second part of this question in a second.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important topic around open pedagogy. Not everyone is comfortable allowing their students to have that much input in their course. And I don't let students decide everything, that's for sure. There's the importance of setting boundaries, but creating an open environment for your students to be collaborators starts before the course. And I make a short video that I send out to my students saying, we're co-creating this course. You're in it with me. Now, I can veto things, but I'm going to ask your input, and I'm going to ask it often. And it's not that I'm not prepared. It's that I want to know what you want. And so I do this before the syllabus has been created, usually a few weeks before classes start. And students already start thinking about it. The first day of class, instead of being syllabus day, is actually a day where we talk through these, and I show them the results of the survey of 90% of students want this. And I always give the option, if there's strong objections, email me, right? We can talk it through and figure out some options. And so it's important that students realize that my expectations for them is to be a participant in this.
And I think that works really well, because I think sometimes in an online environment, students can feel that the education is happening to them rather than with them. And so when you can kind of engage them in these concepts or in these, topic choices and things like that, it can really help them kind of buy into your class more and be more engaged. Of course, that doesn't mean we're throwing out the syllabus either. And I've found that sometimes when students, maybe their expectations aren't in line, or maybe they don't like a specific assignment or a specific thing that you want them to do, if you take that opportunity as a way to explain, well, this is why I think this is important, or this is why I think you need to learn how to present data in a clear way for lay people to understand. And you give them those reasons, that can really help them understand that, maybe this isn't your favorite assignment, but there's value there. And there's a reason why we're doing this. I didn't arbitrarily assign something, but I crafted a project based on something I used to do when I was working in public health. And I took that kind of template and said, you're going to practice this now so you don't have to figure it out when you're working. And so I think I found them to be quite responsive to that kind of thing. So on to the second part of this question. So do you allow your students input into what is and isn't working during the course of during the semester? And how do you navigate differences between students when setting these expectations? So here, what Jess and I both do in our courses is a mid-semester evaluation. So we send out around that kind of 6th or 7th week of the course. Frankly, I think we both use Google Forms and just ask students to give us their experiences in the course so far. And that allows us to see what's working and what isn't working, but it also allows us to identify any particular problem areas. So maybe I'm not being clear on what our learning objectives are, or maybe I could do better in crafting a weekly announcement. And so that allows the opportunity to course correct if necessary. But it also gives the students an option to kind of give us feedback and to have some buy-in into the class.
And oftentimes we share these results with the students. So we make a short PowerPoint just showing, 95% of students are enjoying this class and they like the organization, but here's some comments and here's some things we're willing to change. So, or talking about some of those transparent components that Sarah was discussing. I may have all of my assignments due at 9 p.m. Now, students don't like that because they can't stay up till midnight. But I tell them this is public health and sleep is important, and I go to bed before midnight. So if there's an issue, I want to be around to solve it. And so after providing some of that rationale, students tend to be more amenable to some of the things that maybe they would like to see change, but instead, once they see the reason behind it, it can often make things a little less tense. And I think it's important to always check in with your students multiple times during the semester. And this semester is especially challenging, as with the many we have seen lately during the pandemic. When I notice that students aren't participating quite as much, I stop and I say, "What's going on? How's things going? What's happening in your life?" And inevitably, I find out there's a huge exam in one course or a big paper due in another. So we stop for a second, we talk about that, and then we continue to get back on the topic. I want them to recognize that I care about what they're going through and I respect that, but that we also need to meet some of these objectives and continue on. And so sometimes just a short check-in to have students just tell you what's going on that day and maybe why they're not participating as much can be a really good way to solicit some of that feedback. Or even with assignments. Sometimes I have a reflection component of assignments. What'd you think about this? And you can get some very truthful information and begin to learn more about what your students think about things.
We did that this semester too in the culminating project pilot that we mentioned earlier, where kind of in the mid-semester, we met with each of the students in the class and said, "Hey, how's it going? What do you think?" And a number of students said they wanted more information on grants and writing grants and managing grants. And so Jess and I said, okay, we're gonna shift the final 2 weeks or so of the semester. We're gonna kind of pivot away from what we were using, and we're gonna incorporate some information on writing grants and grant management. So it does put more burden on the instructor, but I think you get such a richer product out of it. The students have a higher quality experience that it really works well in kind of preparing our students to graduate and go out into the world, which, sometimes when you get those emails, you're like, oh, but then it works out and turns out better than you could have thought of. So we have reached the end, I believe, of our question list. I don't know if we do have a few minutes, I guess, so if anybody wants to pop in with a couple of extra questions, we have a few minutes. We also have our contact information on the slide there, so if we didn't answer your question or we gave you more questions, you're welcome to reach out to us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessica and Sarah. We're so grateful not only for your time, but for your knowledge and the expertise that you shared with us today. Thank you so very much for giving us this great presentation. As a reminder, we have recorded it, so you all will receive a copy of the recording in your inbox tomorrow. So just make sure you keep checking that around tomorrow afternoon, around the same time. You'll get the recording from us. Again, Jessica and Sarah both have their email addresses on there. If any questions come up while you're watching the recording or just after you've digested today's presentation, they are wonderful. Feel free to reach out and connect and continue this dialogue and conversation. With that said, we do have a list of all of our upcoming webinar Wednesdays on our website. We also have a library of all of our recordings, so feel free to go in and see what's coming up and register for some of the great webinars we have coming up for the continuation of the spring and actually into early summer and fall. So you'll see a calendar there where you can begin registering. With that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah and Jessica for closing remarks and any advice they'd like to leave for us.
Thank you so much for your participation and questions today. And I hope that you walk away with hopefully a new idea to try or think about in your classroom, or just realizing that sometimes some of these challenges can help us to begin to think about new innovative ways of teaching.
What Jess said, it was a pleasure talking with you about what we're doing and what we hope to accomplish with our online MPH and our other teaching and learning opportunities. And please feel free to follow up if you have questions, or if somebody out there wants an MPH, you can also follow up with me that way too.
Excellent. Thank you both. Thank you all for joining us. Take care, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again.